Direnç'te herkese merhabalar. Bugün ABD'den Andrew Dobbin'le birlikteyiz. Kendisi Stony Brook Üniversitesi'nde felsefe bölümünde doktora çalışmaları yürütüyor. Ve aynı zamanda da Amerika'da çok geniş bir örgütlülük sahibi olan doktora yüksek lisans öğrencileri ve öğretim elemanları sendikasının da başkanlığını yürütüyor. Kendisiyle Trump, ABD'deki son gelişmeler, neler yaşandı, biraz olayın iç yüzü hakkında konuşmak istedik. Onun fikirlerini almak istedik. Hello Andrew.
Howdy.
Thank you very much for this participation of yours to our live stream. We want to ask you about questions, what is happening in the US, and what is really happening, and what will happen, and what is the situation now. First of all, what do you think what actually happened in the US?
There's a lot of, I would say, competing narratives about what January 6th actually was. But when you kind of look at who was participating and how it all went down, there's a couple things you can draw out. Obviously, as compared to Black Lives Matter protests and other various mass movement type stuff, that the policing was completely different, right? Normally, when you have a large protest in Washington, D.C., even if it's like a very tame thing, like a couple years ago, there was this march called the March for Science, which, as you can assume, was rather tame, rather middle class, a lot of just middle class white people. There were still militarized federal agents who were patrolling that thing, right? This was unique in that there was only Capitol Police and not any of the other federal agencies that are usually policing these DC protests. And they usually police them with a lot of military weaponry and military gear, right? So it was essentially like policing a protest that had stated it was essentially an angry mob, not with gendarmes, but with just like normal cops, right? So that came about most likely because one, police officers and security apparatus did not consider these people to be enemies in the same way that they think of like Black Lives Matter protesters or basically anyone else. And also it's clear that the Trump administration, through various means, tried to kind of sabotage the security response to for the rioters so that something like this could happen, right? So that there could be some sort of capital, right? But that was only plausible because large amounts of the Capitol Police themselves are rather right-wing. They're Trump supporters. A lot of them have ties to fascist organizations. And so already we're starting to see arrests of various Capitol Police members for their participation or conspiracy with the riot on the 6th. And you can see this in videos where members of the Capitol Police are taking photos and selfies with the protesters. The fascist rioters are, demanding to be let in, and they just open the doors and they just walk in, right? There's quotes from the various news articles where the police say things like, well, we just have to let them do their thing for a little bit, right? So I think what you saw was a combination of some people were deliberately trying to storm the U.S. Capitol. Some people were deliberately not taking it seriously. And you sort of combine that and you get this like comedy of errors where, it's as if a fascist putsch is being run by some of the dumber people you've ever met, right? Because the moment they took the Capitol, they didn't know what the hell they were doing. So they started, stealing lecterns and taking selfies. Now, to be clear, there's definitely a faction amongst them that was, interested in, finding various members of Congress and murdering them in public, right? Like, we're a few minutes away on that day from probably a few Congress members getting shot or killed or something, because like the crowd itself was very close to breaking in the House of Representatives before they were sealed, and there was basically no security. It was a joke. And if you've seen photos of like the zip tie guy who had a bunch of zip ties ready to go as if he was looking to find people and arrest them, and for a lot of these people, committing mass executions of members of Congress is part of you might say like a millenarian or religious sort of impulse, because they believe in this thing called QAnon. Are you familiar with QAnon?
No, I'm not.
Okay, so QAnon is important because it animates a lot of what happened. So QAnon is a conspiracy theory that came about like 2.5 years ago.
Mm.
And it's essentially a conspiracy theory for Trump supporters to help explain why Trump seems so bad at being president and why he's not capable of consolidating power in the robust way they expect him to, right? Because like Trump supporters think Trump has like magic powers and is this big strong guy, but like he's mostly just like a big fucking narcissist who is like focused on his own self, right?
It's a kind of whitewashing Trump with the opposite thoughts.
So
they are attacking Trump because he's the one we should be back inside, back on it.
Exactly. So they think Trump is actually part of a global effort to secretly prosecute a global cabal of child molesters who enslave children for sex and then kill them for their adrenal glands and use the adrenal glands to make a special drug called adrenochrome that they drink to stay immortal. Now, what I just told you sounds absolutely insane, because it is, but large swaths of the people there on January 6th believe this. And what they also believed was that they were taking part in something called the Storm. And the Storm was essentially like the apocalyptic end of this conspiracy theory, where all the Democrats would be arrested and they would have mass executions to clear out the pedophile ring that runs the country and runs the globe. Oh. So there was a large portion of people who legitimately were planning to, go kill members of Congress because this was part of the Storm. But a large part of it was just that the security apparatus of the U.S. has a lot of fascists in it, has a lot of people who like Trump, and they just weren't trying very hard. And, they kind of wanted this to happen.
Okay. I understand that, it's not like in popular protests, because it's like one wing of the state, which is against the other wing of the state. It's like a coup d'etat, maybe we can call it. And from your sayings, from your explanations, I guess it's Trump supporters, and Trump himself is very strong in the police department as well. In 4 years, I think he recruited many police officers who really support Trump from the heart, I mean.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the riots, it was a lot of ex-military, a lot of off-duty police officers and security officers, and also a lot of small business owners, right? I mean, Trump's base of support is it's very stereotypically kind of fascist, in that like we always say that like fascism is its base is the petty bourgeoisie, small business owners, right? It's like that's pretty much base, right? Trump became really, really, really excited by boat parades, for example. Trump supporters would have boat parades during the election season. And, boats are not exactly something you buy if you're a working class person because they are expensive, right? So the way to think about it is that most of the people there were, they're either members of the security in some way, the police, primarily, or they were kind of, small business, petty bourgeois types. That was a big chunk of it.
Yeah, but don't you think when you put Trump supporters into a kind of social category like this, petty bourgeoisie, don't you think they are a little bit, deserve it, because they are also repressed by the bourgeoisie, and they want to be rich as they are. They are also suppressed by the government as well. So it's a kind of, I think, whitewashing as well. Another type of whitewashing the Trump supporters.
Yeah. I mean, you can kind of see this with the pandemic. A big reason why, the Republican Party became so anti-mask and anti, any kind of COVID suppression wasn't just that Trump tried to ignore it. It was that when you look at the social base of the Republican Party versus the Democratic Party in terms of where capital kind of moves around, the capitalist factions with the Democratic Party tend to be like big tech and finance. A lot of jobs where you can be remote and it's fine, whereas the supporters of the Republican Party, in terms of which capital kind of allies with them, tend to be a lot of small business owners, a lot of resource extraction industries, stuff like getting oil out of the ground. And so for them, they had this extra incentive to play down the pandemic because the lockdowns were, hitting sort of small business owners the hardest, and also hitting oil demand and all of the associated industries with oil extraction and resource extraction. And so, there's clear kind of like material currents floating here, but especially in the US, you can't ignore superstructure because people's brains are just absolutely melted by the bizarre ideology that they like just ingest at maximum speed right now because they have nothing to do. They're stuck at home, and so they watch thousands of hours of YouTube videos about all the dumbest, craziest things you've ever seen. And like they slowly but surely have just like really lost the capacity to interact with reality. I don't know if you've seen the stories, but there's literally stories of people gasping for breath in a hospital being told they have COVID, and they say, "Oh no, I don't have COVID." Hoax. Like that only happens when you've gone knee deep into the crazy pool.
Yeah, it's like being hypnotized. They can't think anything. I guess. And
Yeah.
I think you actually answered my second question, and I was gonna ask you this breaking of agreement between the bourgeois groups. Can we understand this event like this? And I think so. It's a kind of disagreement between the two sides of the bourgeoisie.
Yeah.
And what is waiting for you tomorrow? What is going to happen in tomorrow of the U.S. Do you think?
Yeah, I think a lot of people on the left are discounting the effects this is going to have, because as a leftist, right, you think of like the founding myths and the civic religion of American patriotism as all nonsense, right? Like, and it is. But the average person believes in all this crap. And so when they see the U.S. Capitol building being stormed by a crazed man wearing horns, right, that actually has a real impact on them. Yeah. And the other thing to think about is that the Democratic Party, you know, we always what did Julius Nyeri like to say? He said, America, capitalists are so decadent, you have a one-party system, but you have two of them, right? You know, the Democrats are never to be relied on, right? But in this instance, I think a lot of the Democratic leadership now sees not just Trump, but the Republican Party as, in a certain unredeemable, right? That these people tried to kill us with a mob. So there's no way we can work with these people. And, you know, they're actually an enemy that we're going to have to fight. And that's unique, because the Democrats always like to say things like, oh, well, we need to reach across the aisle. We need a strong Republican Party to govern with us. But this has sort of shattered that illusion in a way that I didn't think was possible, because the actual leadership of the party just saw that the Republicans, if given the chance, will murder them, right? So they're thinking, well, I now have very little incentive to work with these people. Base of my party also now has no incentive to want to work with these people. So I think you're going to see a much stronger polarization in politics. And in terms of the left, I think there is an opportunity in terms of constructing a kind of anti-fascist coalition. Now that liberals sort of see that the fascists, now we all know the history of popular fronts and how they can fall apart. Now, that's obviously something to be concerned about. But it does feel to me less like, you know, a popular front that will falter, and more like what happens in the lead up to the Civil War in the U.S., where one faction of the bourgeoisie, which was tied to slave labor capitalism, became increasingly insane and increasingly violent towards not just working people and their own slaves, but also towards what you would call like the left wing of capital, right? And so what's funny is that the Republican Party of today was actually founded as a fairly radical left-wing organization 100 and some odd years ago that basically said, we're going to destroy slavery, we're going to crush the slave power.
Abraham Lincoln's party, right?
What?
Abraham Lincoln's party was the Republican Party.
Yep. Yeah. And so I think we're seeing the potential for a realignment in politics where, if the left plays its cards right, because of the way the party systems are structured, now it could go all wrong. I'm not saying we're in the bad timeline. Anything is possible, but there is a potential here where we can use this event and also a lot of demographic factors where the young people in this country are far more left-wing than the old people, where we can shift the discourse and the politics left, and in some ways potentially sort of make the GOP, make the Republican Party a minority party for a while, and potentially force it to reconstitute itself as a kind of center party of capital, and give us some room to actually have a real left party, a real workers' party. Right.
Okay, so you are dreaming another party in the parliament, you know, not inside the Democrat Party there are leftists. It's not like that, but you dream of another party.
Yeah, I think there's a potential here where, if the GOP, if the Republican Party is seen as an enemy not just of the left but of all American decency, right, then there is a potential where they are attacked and confronted And as the demographics build, basically, as older Republicans who watch a lot of Fox News and essentially are crazy, as they die in greater and greater numbers, and as younger people in the millennial and Gen Z cohorts age into the ages where they're more likely to vote, there is an electoral coalition for a lot of left social democratic things that I think can make life in this country less miserable. And that if we play our cards right, we could fracture the Democratic Party and the Republican Party such that the far right factions of the Republican Party essentially just die because there's a lot fewer of them because they're mostly old. And the far right is marginalized, and it reconstitutes around a kind of right of center, small c conservatism. And that is reconstituted with the right-wing elements of the Democratic Party and the left-wing elements of the Democratic Party and other parts of the left form some kind of workers' movement. That, I think, is possible. The other possibility is that we don't destroy the GOP, we don't attack the Republicans properly, and we get rising, violent, years of lead strategy of tensions situation where where right-wing white supremacists engage in constant acts of public bombing and shooting, and eventually the left responds with retaliatory violence, and that this level of increasing political violence leads to the majority of people go, just make it stop. I just want things to calm down. And then we get some sort of authoritarian government to make things calm again. So there's good and bad here.
Yeah, I think also they also want to make this happen because the movements in the U.S. Have been rising for a few years. Women movements and Black Lives Matter movements, and the people are very, unpleasant about the economical situation, and the leftist side could embrace them in their protests. They explain themselves with the Black Lives Matter movement, but actually, I think this is my last movement as well. Inside the dynamics of Black Lives Matter, the worker class really has a huge heaviness in the movement. So I think Trump administration and the state's policies against the people, against the movements, it's a result of this movement. And now, I think so. I agree with you. The people in the leftist side of the U.S. If they can organize and they can be a part of parliament, maybe in the legal side, I mean, and in the streets, they go on protests for the and for the workers. I think we can more than a balance. I mean, we can be superior to the racist side of the government. Okay. I want to ask you another question. It's also about the things that you talked about us. What should working class and oppressed peoples, not only as a reflex, but also as a solution, what should they do in order to make something, in order to create something?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on where you are and kind of what you're doing, right? So if you're, I think, not to be a stereotypical union guy, but I think trying to organize unions wherever you are is really important. I think it's really important that if you're so inclined, the working class has to organize for its own self-defense, right? These people are on the right are crazy. They love guns, and they would love to kill us. And as we saw, the police are not going to protect us, right? We have to protect ourselves. So, this idea that confronting fascism materially is just playing a game or something. No, it's deadly serious, and it's important that people are willing to confront fascists and not allow them a public platform, right?
So you think economical organizations, the unions and the syndicates, are very important?
I think
important mission in front of the working class.
Yeah, we have to build power at the point of production, right? Because labor movement in the U.S. is very weak. It needs to be stronger. We just generally need to organize everywhere. We need better and more robust sort of organization of working and oppressed people in the U.S., not just in the sense of unions, but in the sense of providing material mutual aid to each other in terms of confronting fascism, and making sure that it does not, terrorize our communities. And, as a sideline, as a secondary thing, engaging in limited ways in electoral work where we can make a difference, right? So I'm not one to say that we can vote our way into the promised land, but in a limited fashion, there are opportunities to, representation within the state apparatus, and use that as kind of a lever to amplify what people on the streets are doing, right?
Yeah.
Because right now, the members of the so-called squad in the House, right, the left-wing members of the House of Representatives, those are the only people right now who are openly calling for the expulsion of various Republican members from the House of Representatives. And that is gaining support amongst fairly normal people, right? If they weren't there, you wouldn't see that, right? So I think that is useful.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's a kitchen sink approach. Whatever you're best at doing in terms of building power for the left, just go out and do it.
Yeah,
we don't really have time to
yes. Building a power means building something in the parliament and building something on the streets as well, and in economical organization, having a power in unions is also another side of this. I want to thank you for this really fruitful interview with you, and I also want to ask you a few questions about the university resistance in Turkey. Have you ever heard about it, and what do you think if you heard about it?
Yeah, we just passed a solidarity resolution. My union, the Graduate Employees Union for New York State, we just passed a solidarity resolution in support of student resistance there. I mean, it is very similar to how universities in the U.S. have been taken over by neoliberal managers who are not there to actually help the institution work as a place of research and learning and education, but instead they just seek to extract. Yeah, and I mean that kind of looks like what Erdogan is trying to do, right? It seems like this is an attempt to take away the university's ability to kind of govern itself, and instead make it an institution that exists for the benefit of capital, and obviously the AKP and all the fun folks who run that august organization that I'm sure everyone on the stream really is a big fan of.
A counselor of Erdogan said Tuesday, I guess, to question the president's decisions is not healthy, he said. What do you think about it?
I mean, My friend Flint was beaten up by Erdogan's guards in Washington, D.C. outside of the consulate. So, yeah, I think it can be unhealthy, but not because it's wrong, but because Erdogan will make it unhealthy for you, right? I mean...
Yeah, it's like a threat to us.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly a threat. I mean, this is not a man who's known for taking criticism lightly, though... I get the feeling when, at least looking at the value of the Turkish lira, he's feeling a little uncomfortable lately.
Yeah. I think these days it's like normal. You know, it's a little bit rising against the dollar currency, but I think it's gonna be decreased again. You know, because of the economic situation, I guess, and I think they are very frightened about this situation because they can't handle it. They are trying to handle it with taking money, doing swaps from the other countries like Qatar or something Arabic countries, but it's like carrying a bowl of water to just you understand it. Okay. Yeah. And
I think you can see this move to try to consolidate power universities. It's all part of a larger pattern of the AKP, I think, is starting to get a little concerned about their hold. At least that's how it looks from the outside. It looks like they're starting to realize, oh, we might not be able to have a monopoly on governance for much longer if we can't manage the currency, right? So let's tamp down where we can.
And it's also, to me, it's like a move before something happens. You know, it's like a pre-move because they want to itch our nerves, to do something because people are really, disturbed about the situation and they are really sick of this pandemic situation, and he wants to just check us with some moves because if not so, it is very unreasonable to do it this time of the year with a lot of problems inside the country, outside the country, changing the rector, changing the trustee, and appointing a trustee is not something logical to me. I guess it's like a strategic move. It's a tactical move before something happens.
I mean, what it reminded me of was like Gezi Park, in that I think Erdogan is trying to pick a fight with people he can portray as middle-class students, and then use that to stoke resentment, right? To go back to, the heartland support of the AKP and say, these people are just crazy. You have to support me. That's my guess, but I don't know what the hell I'm talking about.
Okay. Well, thank you very much again, Andrew, for this interview. I stand in solidarity with the people who rise against the government, and as Direniş'teyiz, we support you guys from here, Turkey. I hope you can beat them up, and you can have a success in overthrowing this this government. Thank you very much.
All right. Talk to you later.
Yeah.